Welcome back to the Nose Knows. So today I'm going to do a little video response to the great people over at 4X Alchemist. I'm very excited that they're back in the game. If you don't know, 4X Alchemist are a couple brothers who are very, very knowledgeable in strategic games, 4X games. They have a pretty cool YouTube channel. You should definitely go check them out if you're not familiar with them. But they've taken a little break from Endless Space 2 for a while. They have some awesome content on Endless Space 2. Some of it's a little bit dated, but I'm happy to announce that they have recently come back. They've recapped some of the new patch changes and the new DLC, and they just recently released some videos on the Vaulters. And me being one of the biggest Vaulter fans in the world, I've been commenting quite frequently on their videos, and I wanted to just do a little bit of a video response to their guides and point out a couple of things that I've noticed that we've been discussing in their chat, and maybe give them some information that they haven't thought about or some different perspectives on things. I know that they've definitely helped me develop my own gameplay with their perspectives on all of their videos. They have some really good detailed guides. They have some really cool ideas on what makes the best play at any given point in the game, and so you should definitely check them out if you're trying to improve your gameplay. But first and foremost, let's just go ahead and get into Vaulters and what makes the Vaulters the Vaulters. I think that's best served once we actually get into the game, but these are the game settings that I generally play with. I do change the difficulty quite a bit. A lot of times I'll play on hard or somewhere lower than endless, but I'm moving towards playing with endless more frequently. I'm definitely not an expert at the game. I don't claim to be. I don't claim to have all the answers. I just claim to have a lot of ideas, and I like to share my ideas with people who are into strategy games and see if I can improve them, make them better. And sometimes I'm able to point out things for people that they weren't thinking about, and sometimes they're able to point out things that I hadn't thought about. And that's definitely been the case with 4X Alchemist. They've changed my perspective on certain things. So we'll talk about a few things that I've pointed out. If you followed my Vaulter series, I've definitely have pointed out some of those things as I've played. And I'm getting to the point in that series where I'm wanting to maybe start a new game as opposed to finishing the one that we had been working on, but I'll consider doing that as well. So Vaulters. The coolest thing about the Vaulters, everybody already knows, you don't start with a system, you start with this awesome colony ship called the Argosy. If you're not familiar with the Vaulters' history, in the previous game by Amplitude, Endless Legend, where the Vaulters were truly introduced, their quest line has them building this giant colony ship to get off of the planet before a cataclysmic event that they predict is coming wipes them out. And so we're basically continuing the story of the Vaulters. They managed to escape the planet, but they have some more bad luck, and they drift around aimlessly for a long time. Their ship's about to go out of power, and they're all about to die out in the black of space when they run into this awesome node. I noticed 4X Alchemist guys have trouble describing what this is as well. So there are these nodes in the game that are not systems, but they provide bonuses to systems similar to an anomaly, but they're not an anomaly because anomalies are what are on planets. And so I noticed we both have a hard time talking about what this is. I'd be curious to know if there is an actual name for these things. But I'm just going to call it a special node, I guess, at this point. But anyways, you always start at this special node, and it has a unique property where it repairs your ship if you stay there. So it's actually kind of cool. If you're in combat and you head to this node and just sit on it, your ship will repair faster. So that's pretty cool. But anyways, you start on this node and you get the option to colonize a nearby system. Now, the Argosy has a really, really wide range and it can see a lot. Plus, for some unknown reason, you actually have the location of all the connected star lanes. So you can see every star lane that's connected to this rejuvenation field, plus a little bit further. And so we can see there's quite a bit going on here. In this situation, and this isn't always the case, it's completely random, but in this situation, there's only one system we can actually make it to and settle on our first turn. And that might actually be... Yeah, so this is that weird situation that I was talking about in my video. This does actually happen. So we've actually created a situation where I cannot get to a system on the first turn of the game and settle. It's impossible for me to colonize this. None of these systems have tier 1 planets. This one has a tier 1 planet, but it's already colonized by a minor civ. And so this is the only system I can get to. But if you look at how far it is away from me, it's going to take me 2 turns to get there. So one of the big discussions we were having in my... Wow, that's really convenient. I've seen this happen on other people's YouTube channel, and it's never happened to me before that I can remember. But for it to happen in this video is pretty cool. So in this situation, we've been discussing in 4X Alchemist video whether or not it makes sense to delay colonizing your first system in order to maybe do a little scouting and find a better one, but more importantly, to increase the amount of Golden Age. And so we got to talk about the Golden Age before I can do anything else. So the Golden Age is a temporary buff to all your FIDs. It greatly increases your food, your science, your dust, your influence, your manpower regeneration, and we'll look up the details of it here. Well, I can actually pull them up right here. I found it. Involuntary Nomads. So if you mouse over Involuntary Nomads, it'll tell you exactly what the benefit is of this Golden Age. And this Golden Age has a variable number of turns that grows every turn all the way up to 15. 15 is the cap, so you'll never have a Golden Age longer than 15. They can be shorter than 15, and the rate at which the turns regenerate varies as the game progresses. So right now, every turn that we wait, our Golden Age increases by 2.4 turns. And so that's 2.4 more turns of those benefits. Now your starting system, in many cases, is going to produce fewer resources per turn than having those Golden Ages. That 25 on all of your FIDs is a huge benefit, and I've done the math on it using spreadsheets, and in most situations you're actually going to surpass the raw resources that you were producing if you don't take any other factors into consideration. If you just look at your base rates versus what the base rates would be if you skipped your first couple turns but extended your Golden Age, you actually surpass your base rate. You actually do better in terms of raw total resources after like 15 to 20 turns. The problem is there's other things that are going on in the game that you're not taking advantage of. And the big one that we were discussing is the ability to colonize your second colony. The faster you can get your second colony down, it just dramatically changes the formula. And so if you start on turn 1 on a situation that's not as good, shorter Golden Age, maybe fewer resources than something 2 nodes away, you're still better off. And the reason you're better off is because you kickstart a lot of other background things a little bit faster. So your science gets going a little bit faster, your population growth gets going a little bit sooner. Even though it's at a slower potential for that period of time, because you're starting other processes, it actually ends up slingshotting you ahead. And the other thing is, your ability to colonize your second colony is bottlenecked by the turn in which you colonize your first one. So that's one of the big bottlenecks for that. If you wait 4 turns to colonize your first system, That's 4 turns that you're absolutely going to be delayed, and it may be even more. Because the other aspect of colonizing quickly is gathering resources, and you need to gather strategic resources and dust in order to colonize um, your second ship, your second colony early. If you can't get those two things, then it's going to be delayed even further. And because on turn 1 you start collecting dust and potentially strategics, if you're lucky, um, and even if you're not lucky, you can end up getting those things collected at a quicker pace generally than if you waited the 4 turns. You're going to be able to get your second colony down faster, period. You're going to be able to get it down faster if you settle on turn 1. Even if it's a bad system, you're going to be able to get your second colony faster. And 2 colonies, even 2 bad colonies, are better than 1 slightly better good colony and a delayed second colony. That's basically what I've come to understand. I wasn't sure that that was the case, and the reason for that is I'd done some experimenting, I'd done some scouting where I would look at my first colony, and this looks fantastic, by the way. I don't think I would not choose to settle here. But I would look at like my first situation and I'd say, it doesn't look great, man. I just don't really like it. And I would want to scout. And every once in a while I'd scout and I'd find something way better. And I would be like, well, you know, delaying a couple turns can really set you back, but I wouldn't really feel or notice it in gameplay. Like the feel of where you're at after 20 turns when you delay your colony versus when you don't doesn't feel all that different. And it doesn't because of this Golden Age mechanic. And so what I wanted to point out is that this Golden Age mechanic is going to save our bacon. Even though it's not going to be the most ideal start in the world to delay 1 turn to go here, we don't have a choice. There's no option. And the Golden Age, because it's going to increase from 7 turns to a few extra turns, that's going to offset the lost resources that we would have collected on turn 1. The thing that it's not going to offset, as I pointed out, are things like the luxury resources we could have had that will bottleneck us down the line, particularly with getting our second colony out. It's going to bottleneck our population growth by a couple of turns. We can't really do anything about that. It's going to bottleneck several other little hidden mechanics, and those little hidden things, after 20 to 30 turns of gameplay, if you play the exact same game and you delay your start by say 4 turns, a 4-turn delay in your start, if you settle on turn 4 versus on turn 1, your Golden Age will be about 14 turns. It's double in length. If you do that, you're going to be very close to where you would have been if you had settled on turn 1 in terms of where your system's at, how big it is, you know, how much science you've had done. But it's going to be slightly in favor in most cases of starting on turn 1. You're going to have a slight edge there. And it's very subtle. It's not a huge difference, but it is enough of a difference that I think, especially in terms of getting your second colony down faster, that's where you really get the advantage. Those extra turns that your second colony is down is basically doubling your system output, because you have 2 systems versus 1, so you assume that 2 systems are roughly equivalent, both with Golden Ages. You're definitely doing better by getting it down early, and that's what keeps you ahead. Now, if for some reason you are unable to get your second colony down quickly and you delay your second colony on a turn 1 start, then all bets are off. But if you can accelerate your second colony, the faster you accelerate your second colony, the better off you're going to be. So that's the one detail that I wanted to talk about, and like this is a perfect example of it. So I'm going to have to take my ship over here. I don't have any other options. And while we're heading over here, we're not going to look at any of this stuff. Actually, we will look at these. So 2 of the other things that pop up at the very beginning of the game are these things. And what this is we've discovered deciduous trees, and we've discovered super spuds. What that is, and I'm not sure if I can get to it yet. I cannot until next turn. those are the luxury resources for our two populations. Those are the luxury boosters. So deciduous trees and super spuds. Now, before you settle, one of the things you should do is pay attention to what those are. Or actually, no, I'm mistaken. Deciduous trees and super spuds are because those are on the map. Once we settle, our population will be set, and we'll get 2 new, or maybe 1, depending on if they're both the same. We'll get 2 new luxury notifications, and those will be the boosters. So my mistake. Okay, and we'll just, yeah. We'll go ahead and end the turn. Okay, move our ship. And so we're at a slight disadvantage, but the disadvantage is going to be minimized by the fact that we get 2 extra turns of Golden Age. We don't have any options, but we do. This is... I can't tell. An average deposit, there it is, and an abundant deposit. All right, so this is incredibly beneficial. In fact, I would say that being able to colonize a planet that has both strategics on turn 2 is probably better than being able to colonize any planet with 1 or no strategics on turn 1. The strategics become a real bottleneck for the vaulters in the early game, and you need both of them. Having 1 is only half of your need. So we'll go ahead and we'll colonize this, and you're going to see those 2 luxury notifications pop up. And there they are. So one of our populations likes Jade Onyx, and the other population likes Eden Incense. And neither of those are in our immediate vicinity, but now we know what they are. If we see those in a quest or something in the future, it's very beneficial to grab the rewards for those 2 if you have no better option, because you can pop your population booster and you can get off to the right track. Okay, so once the Argosy colonizes, it has a 4-turn cooldown period before it can create a colony again, which you would think is crazy. Only 4 turns and we can create another colony. Well, yes, you could create another colony, but there's also a hefty fee for doing so. And the cost for creating a new colony is a large amount of dust and a moderate amount of both strategic resources. At this point in the game, we do not have any strategic collecting methods, and so that is basically going to require us to wait an extended period of time, something like 10 or 11 turns, before we can colonize again. So if you wait for the free colonization, I believe it's something like 15 turns. The free colonization, at that point, it doesn't cost anything to colonize, and you can colonize immediately on that turn, and you can get up and running at no cost to you. However, I'm leaning more and more towards 4X Alchemist's suggestion of always spending, and in fact setting yourself up to be able to spend as many resources as possible to colonize early. Now, the cost of those colonizations increases as the game goes on. So the more colonies you have, the more expensive the next one is. And it gets to the point where unless you have really, really fantastic income on titanium, hyperium, and dust, you will not be able to realistically colonize too early. Even the turn before free becomes quite hefty in expense down the line. So keep that in mind. And that is one reason why setting yourself up for lots of secondary sources of income on Hyperium and Titanium are important, even when it seems excessive. So right now, we've got this system colonized. There's 2 strategics on it. It's a fertile planet. It's cold, and because it's cold, it has a lower industry, which sucks for us. There's a few other things going on here that I want to point out. So let's talk about the hero. I want inspect her before I assign her. Um, this hero, the Vaulter's hero, is an overseer. She's a scientist, political leader, and she's a Vaulter. So the overseer definitely has more of a governor management style feel to her. Um, this one in particular is a cool early ability that you'll want to take, and you can use her to move her around to systems that are lacking in food, early systems that you've just colonized. If you have this skill maxed out and they have any fertile planets, um, you can get those systems populated very, very quickly using her. And so what I found with her is I will max this skill out early in the game, and then anytime I drop a new colony ship, I'll immediately move her over there, and she'll provide a substantial benefit to both food and potentially industry. Um, and that will get the system up and running that much quicker, rather than leaving her on a single system for a long period of time. And so what I like to do with her is I like to focus on the abilities that help accelerate systems, as opposed to give big, say, percent bonuses to a system that's already established. Let's go through some of her skills. So this is one that I would almost always take because that's how I like to use her. We're not going to talk about the ones that this is a good one. So this is another one that provides extra strategic collection, and that can be very helpful within the game, particularly on the ones that are a little more rare. You can use this ability to farm a little bit more, but also because the Vaulters value the early resources so much more than other factions do, because we have to use them for so many other things. Like, everybody uses the early strategics, but the Vaulters have a greater demand for it because they have other things that they have to spend these on. So this becomes a more valuable skill than it would for other overseer races or factions that have an overseer. I don't usually get, I mean, obviously that's a great one, but these are the two that I would focus on in this tree. This one is okay. It's kind of counterintuitive because, again, I'm generally going to be moving her around to systems that have low population initially, and so this is not a priority skill for me, but it is one that I may throw points into if I'm locked out of the next tree and I don't have another one that I really want to spend points in. The approval is okay. Vaulters don't have a big problem with approval, at least in the early game. But because their populations grow so fast, and because you can fully colonize systems pretty quickly, and a lot of times those planets are pretty crappy, this can be helpful. It's not the most useful ability, but it can be a critical, like, there's definitely a time where grabbing this will keep you at ecstatic or keep you above the next lower tier of happiness. So it's a good idea to grab it when that's the case, if it happens to come up. This is the ability that really is one that I think I'm beginning to wonder if it's almost always the best choice for her first level or two. And the reason for that is, in our situation at least, maybe it's not, because we ended up with our starting planet having both strategic resources. But the earliest bottle cap in the game is going to be probably that first colony ship that you want to try to get down. And by grabbing this as my level 2 skill, I'm going to start collecting both resources in equal amounts. And what that means is, as the amount of strategics goes down, it starts at like 10, so it goes down from 10 to 9 to 8 to 7 to 6. As that's going down, my quantity of those resources is going up, and you will inevitably meet in the middle. Even in the worst case scenario where you start in a system and your first system has no strategics whatsoever, this skill becomes almost mandatory. And the reason for that is it's the easiest way to accelerate your ability to colonize the Argosy faster. It absolutely is. Now, granted, there are other ways to do it. The guys at Forex Alchemist will definitely suggest using the marketplace and making sure that you have a big enough stockpile of dust to do that. And that works okay when you only have to buy one of the two pairs. The reason for that is because dust is the other cost. And so if you're having to buy both titanium and Hyperium in some quantity, the amount of dust that that's going to take for that first colony ship is so big that what will then become your bottleneck is the dust, because the dust cost is still pretty high when you're in the middle of that decreasing cost. And so you will not be able to do it efficiently. And so I'm thinking it may even be better off to just grab that, like James in his Vaulter series, I can't remember his name, one of the guys, they had a fantastic starting setup where they had a bunch of titanium deposits on 2 different planets, and they got them up and running pretty quickly. And so they have this big amount of titanium coming in, and they had to buy the Hyperium in the marketplace to get their colony down quicker. If you had taken this skill at level 2, granted, your population wouldn't have been growing as fast, which I definitely see the advantage of, but it would have saved you a significant amount of dust, and it would have prevented you from being required to accelerate the marketplace in your tech tree. You could have done the marketplace at a different point in time and focused on other things that maybe were more valuable or could have accelerated your growth down the line. I think that the marketplace is still a really, really powerful and good early thing that you need to grab, but it gives you more flexibility, I guess, to go with this, because that eliminates that dust cost. It allows you to use that dust for ship retrofitting or ship improvement, where you can build ships at a cheaper cost production wise and then just retrofit them with dust to costs or to the outfit design that you actually want. So there's a lot of options. But I think this ability, in my mind, is becoming more and more critical, at least 1 point at the very early part of the game, and maybe even 2 points by the end of the game. Just because of the amount of times that you're going to need titanium and Hyperium in equal cost. That's kind of the theme of the Vaulters. Like, they always need both resources in equal cost for various things, whether it's portals, whether it's colonizing ships. There's a lot of stuff that's going on with Vaulters where they need these resources at greater quantities than other factions. This ability is cool, plus 15% science on system. It's less cool the way that I use this hero, because I am constantly moving her around to new systems that have not been developed yet. They don't tend to have a lot of science, and so this isn't as critical of an ability for me until late game, when all my systems are bigger and I'm just throwing her on whatever system I want. But while I'm in the process of constantly colonizing, this has less value for me. Yeah, and then obviously, like, the higher tier ones are both really good. Except for this one doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but minus 10% dust cost on hero. Yeah. So that talks about the hero a little bit. The other thing that I want to really point out, and this is another factor that I think you really need to take into account when you're deciding whether to make the hero, to put the hero in a ship on turn 1 versus not put her in a ship. And that is her starting skill. Plus 10 industry per anomaly on colonized planet on system. And so what I want to point out is, if you start in a system that has a lot of anomalies, like we have 3 anomalies in this system. Unfortunately, all 3 of the anomalies are on planets that we are not colonized, or we have not colonized, and we cannot colonize in the immediate future. If that's not the case, if it is the case that you have multiple anomalies on a single planet that you can colonize, or multiple planets you could colonize quickly with other strategics or other things, luxury resources that might be of value to you, it may be the case that getting her down does actually accelerate things to a point where it's worth having her on the system within that first 8 turns. It's going to be close either way, and I think probably the rule of thumb is that it's probably better to leave her as a scout for the first 8 turns or so until you can get enough curiosities to send her back. But I think it's a logistics question, and you don't always know the logistics of it, because that's really determined by making sure that you can get her enough curiosities to level up before about turn 8, and also get her back to the system without having to delay that by any means, because she can't just teleport back to the system anymore. I think she has to get onto a friendly territory, which means you're gonna have to detach her and move her back. So if she's on the system increasing productivity through anomalies, I think it makes a little bit more sense to start her on a system at level 1. If you don't have the anomalies, and the anomalies need to be a huge factor in determining whether or not you're colonizing other planets early. Obviously, colonizing other planets early makes buildings better. You know, like public-private partnerships or xenolinguistics are better the more planets you have. So that goes into your calculation of, is this providing me enough resources to justify doing it? Because sometimes just colonizing another planet gives you more resources than any of the other buildings you could put down. And that's because of things like this hero ability, which gives you another 10 industry for every anomaly on a planet. So keep that in mind when you're doing your cost-benefit calculation, is all I would say. I think that I may have missed it, but I don't think you really talked about the 10 industry that she's offering per anomaly on planet, and it definitely is part of my calculation. And I think it's important to consider it. In this situation, we're not getting any extra industry from her on this planet, and we don't have the ability to unlock these ones right away or anytime soon, really. So I don't think it makes sense to put her as a governor. I think what we're going to do is we're going to put her on the colony or on a scout ship if we do anything with her. I'm not sure how much we're going to actually play this game. I just wanted to get into a game so I could point out some of the things that I'm talking about. So the one other thing that I really want to consider talking about that I don't think anybody has really discussed. If you go to the population details for the vultures and you mouse over their level 50 bonus, it's basically a 10% of your manpower gets converted into a science boost. So that doesn't sound like a lot, but especially when you read this, it's 0.1 science per manpower on systems. It doesn't sound like a lot at all, but when you go here and you look at, okay, what is our current manpower? Well, right now we have 310 manpower out of a possible 350. So it's 10%. And so if and when I get capped at 350 manpower on my system, I'm going to have 35 extra science per turn. Now at this point in the game, 35 extra science per turn is huge, right? It's a lot. Like if I go and I look at how much science I'm actually producing, I'm only producing a 55 science total. 55 science total. 35 is almost double that. You know, it's like an extra 40%. So, no, 60, 70%. It's like almost 70% of what we're producing. So, it's huge. Now, as the game goes on, that manpower statistic is going to increase. Every system that we have increases the cap. And there are a number of buildings that also increase the cap. And this is what I wanted to point out. The Vaulters get some very cool buildings. And the Budokai Bunker is a building that generally speaking, I would almost never consider for any other faction. The extra manpower that it's producing uh, is not very useful, especially in the early game. It's just not. But for the Vaulters, the one thing that I would consider about this building that's a little different than any other building is that potentially that 300 extra manpower cap actually equates to 30 potential extra science. If I told you that I could build a building that would give me a significant amount of science and would also provide defense, you might find that a little bit more palatable. And also if I told you that the industry cost and the upkeep cost was very, very small. And that is exactly the case with this building. This building, because it's a faction-specific version, it's more effective than the traditional building, which I think is like 150 capacity, maybe even, it might be 200, but I think it's 150. We actually get double the capacity and potentially 30 science from this in the late game, mid to late game. And so that's when you really need to ramp up your science in the mid to late game, because things get more and more expensive to research. The early quest that the Vaulters get, they have to choose. They have two options. They can choose to basically build 4 military buildings or 4 science buildings. Now you're pretty much guaranteed to build the 4 science buildings. You start with science buildings already researched, so you don't even have to research them. You also start with kind of a, well, we'll just leave it at that. You start with science buildings already researched, so you already have the technology you need to get those down. You've probably already queued up one of them, so you're already down to, by that point in the game, you've already either queued it up or started building it. So you've got 3 of the 4 that you need to finish, and it's something you're going to do anyways. You constantly have to build science. Military is not quite that way. Like, you definitely need military, but the more valuable military building in this early part of the game is definitely big data shipyards, and that's only going to be the case if you're going to be more aggressive and you want your ships to be leveled up to have a slight advantage against other players who might become equally aggressive with you. This building doesn't look all that fantastic. Definitely not in the early game. But I think in the mid to late game, throwing these Budokai bunkers down, or similar buildings, like if you move up a tier, you'll see things like this. 250 capacity with reduced probability of population loss and destroyed improvements. 250 capacity with an extra 750 damage done to attackers during ground battles. If you think about this, that's 25 and 25 and 30. So each one of these buildings is pumping out a lot of science once you get your manpower filled up. And it doesn't take long to fill your manpower up if you grab a few of the food related buildings over here. I want to say that this is a good strategy. I want to say that this is the way that the Vaulters were intended to be played. I don't know whether it's optimal, but my feeling is that the Vaulters are supposed to grab an empire quickly, and it won't be as large as maybe other people, but they get it down fast because of their ability to accelerate their colonies, and they get to kind of cherry pick the best systems. And then they use their portal system, which we'll talk about in a moment, to logistically keep their systems defended with one large, well-developed fleet. You don't have to have multiple fleets with Vaulters. You have one really decent fleet, and it can be everywhere because of the portal system, because of the ability to teleport between your systems, and also to teleport between pirate systems, which is another cool little neat thing that Vaulters get the ability to do. So you can do that. You can teleport between systems with one large fleet, so you don't have to spend an inordinate amount of time cranking out massive numbers of fleets to defend all of your different systems that are spread out all over the galaxy. That's a recipe for disaster with any other faction. But I, as the Vaulters, can scout out all of the best planets in the mid to early game, get my colony ship there quickly with its ridiculous move speed, and colonize things that are way far away from the rest of my empire, and it doesn't matter. It matters zero to me, because I can have my entire fleet there instantly. I can build a new fleet and move it to the front lines in record time. So that's how we start the game. We grab the best systems, we build them up really, really fast, and then we kind of stall out in terms of our ability to keep grabbing more territory. The Argosy takes longer and longer to recover the Golden Age, so you're not getting as much benefit if you're accelerating that colony. The cost gets more and more expensive, and it actually is an interesting curve where you skyrocket a number of systems in the early game, and then you peter off in your ability to continue at that pace. It gets crippling. Like, you just can't keep grabbing systems at some point. So you kind of have this core group of systems that your empire, they're all really good because you got to kind of cherry pick the best systems if you did enough scouting, and they're well defended. And so you move into the mid game and you basically turtle up, and in the mid game you start grabbing these buildings. And if you wanted to, because in the situation of that event that I was talking about, so that event, the critical component for me in that event is the reward. There's a strategic reward and a luxury reward every single time. The military is always a strategic reward. The science faction quest line is always a luxury reward. The value is generally going to be in the strategic, but it depends on which strategic it is. If it's titanium and you have access to titanium, it's less valuable, because having an abundance of one type of resource for the Vaulters isn't as critical as having both of them. Titanium is definitely the more preferred one for reasons that we'll talk about, but having both of them is critical, particularly for accelerating your colonization. If you have access to titanium and the military one is Hyperium, that's almost a no-brainer for me, and I will always take that quest. And depending on what's going on at the time, I may go with big data shipyards, but I may actually just go ahead and throw this Budokai bunkers down and get, because it's cheap, because it's quick to build, and because then I don't even have to think about it later on, I get this massive influx of manpower into my system, and that means that when I'm building bigger ships, they're all fully stocked and ready to go. You know, it's a preemptive thing, so there's not a lot of value in it in the short term other than getting the deposit of a resource that I really need. But in the long term, it becomes more valuable. So back to the overall strategy of how the Vaulters, or how I kind of perceive the Vaulters as the best way, or potentially best way to play them. So you grab your tall empire. It's not as big as other people because you kind of slow down in your ability to keep colonizing. And then you turtle up. And you turtle up through your superior ground defense, through your superior logistics with your strong ships and your strong fleet designs. And you crank out a science victory. And you do this by the added benefit of military buildings producing science once you hit your population bonus at 50 pop. So once you hit 50 population bonus, that's the time to start transitioning entirely to turtling up and getting as many military and science buildings down as possible so that you can defend your current systems, and you can crank out enough science within this smaller number of systems by the added science from military buildings like these to actually accelerate into a science victory at an appropriate pace to win the game. If you're not playing with a science victory, I'm not quite sure what the best way for the Vaulters to win is. If you take out the option of a science victory, obviously their military is very strong and they have some unique military tech in regards to boarding pods, and I would imagine that the way that they win a game where you're not focusing on a science victory is a military victory that probably utilizes superior boarding pods, and you just take everybody else's ships and use their ships to destroy them. I think that might be it, but I don't know. But from my perspective and from my knowledge of Vaulters, and the theme of Vaulters throughout the other games has always been build a core group of systems and then kind of turtle up and defend them and win an internal victory. That is the way that I think they're kind of pushed to be played by the abilities that they're given, by the technologies that they're given, and by just their general quest line and theme kind of pushes them in that direction as well. So I'm kind of curious to get other people's ideas on this, so this is why I'm putting this video out. I wanted to see what you guys thought about this, but that's my thoughts on it. And maybe I'm overvaluing the science output from these buildings to the point where it's still not worth doing, but I'm not sure that that's the case, and I haven't played enough to know one way or the other whether that's the case. This is always your tier 1. I mean, even almost invariably, it will be your first building that you need to get down. I can think of a few situations where I've actually grabbed this one first because I started with Hyperium Deposit and my population's already at 3, so that's 369 extra that you're getting. By the time you get the building down, it's at 4, and it's roughly equivalent to this building in certain situations. Plus you're getting the Hyperium extraction going quicker, but this is pretty much where you want to go most of the time. This is a good backup to getting the missing resources, whether it's Hyperium or Titanium. In our situation, because we started with both and I want to mine both as quickly as possible, I might actually do that. But if I only had one or the other, I would probably start with whichever one I had, and then as 4X Alchemist does, they generally go with this early to get access to the market so they can just buy the one they're missing. What else did I want to talk about? There's one other thing. Oh, that's what it was. System development. This is super powerful. Being able to start a system with an extra 40 industry and 40 food gets that system off the ground incredibly quickly. The Vaulters are one of the few factions that are going to value Jadonics at a slightly lower rate than they will Titanium. Titanium is better than Jadonics in my opinion. The food makes up for the fact that you're losing 20 industry. And this is another situation where I feel like prioritizing your hero to get your gather rates higher makes sense, because these two resources are both fantastic. An extra 40 dust and 40 science on every single system can completely eliminate your dust problems. Just gone. It's crazy how good these are. And so my philosophy when it comes to these is that the Vaulters should invariably, without question, prioritize using strategics for their system developments at almost every stage of the game. If you can do it, if you have enough of them, get the production up through the mining facilities so that you're actually cranking out enough of them at a decent clip to upgrade multiple systems. The cost of these is expensive when you move into like tier 2 and tier 3. It takes a lot of them, but it's totally worth doing these even multiple times. I would say your tier 1 should almost always be titanium if possible. And once you get titanium, once you get your system up and running, you could go with Hyperium for your second and maybe one of your luxuries, or maybe titanium again. I mean, that's a lot. You could even go double Hyperium if you want to focus more on your economy and your science. There's just so many benefits to, and this is another thing I was telling you about. It's like we spend these resources at an inordinate rate as vaulters. You will need them in great quantities. So any time that you can increase the gathering rate of these resources, it's almost invariably worth it. But yeah, both of these fantastic. Tier 1 development for sure should probably focus on the food and the industry, because when a system first starts as one population and it has trouble snowballing into getting more things pumped out, this solves that problem. Your growth goes much higher, so you're creating population quickly. Your industry goes higher, so every industry building, those early industry buildings are going down faster, which are then accelerating the next building faster. It's completely worth doing. And then it just depends for tier 2 what your situation is as far as luxuries. Some of these luxuries are still definitely worth grabbing, but I would start focusing more on, can I find a way to give me enough titanium and enough Hyperium to maybe do those again in the tier 2 system development. I don't like these two as well. They're both pretty good if you have a system that is fully populated. And in fact, if you have a system that's fully populated, I've had systems with as many as like 24 or 25 population. These become more cost efficient than these. First of all, they take fewer adamantium or antimatter to plug into a system, so you don't need to gather as much of them in order to use them as a resource. But furthermore, in a system with enough planets and enough population, they actually produce more on that system than the other two. The problem with these two as an early development is early development and early systems don't have the population. And so these are only going to really be good in the late game for your level 3 or 4 system upgrades, where all of your systems are pretty much maxed out on population. This one is really fantastic. Just a flat 5% boost to everything. It's really, really good on a system that's well developed, that has all of the system upgrades, that has a hero, a high level hero on it. This can be a really, really big boost to a well developed system. It's a very minor, almost non-factor on a new system, on a system that is just starting up, a colony with one population and on one planet. Not all that great. And then this one is it's hard to factor in exactly how valuable it is, but I would suspect that 150% to all system development upgrade effects on the system could just be ridiculous. It could just be insanely good. I can't do that math in my head though. And this is such a rare resource, you rarely ever use it in a system development, but vaulters are the only ones that have the option to use it in this capacity. But these two for sure, gathering rates are so critical. I think this and the fact that we need to talk briefly about portals, but this portals and your Argosy colony, let's see. Okay, so portals. Portals have a cost of strategics. I need both strategics and equal capacity to build them. And the number of turns to build them, I think, is kind of like locked. It's like always several turns, even if your industry is really, really high. I know it was in the previous endless space game. It was like always 3 turns to build a portal, regardless of how high your industry was. Maybe that's not the case in this game. I can't quite remember. I don't pay attention when I build portals nearly as much as I should. But basically, if you build one of these, it shows up on the map. If I zoom out here, it'll show up on the map over here as like a little cube disintegrating. And any system that had that little disintegrating cube has a portal, and you can teleport from that system directly, just like if it were a wormhole. And it takes all of your movement to travel that way, so you can't move once you get to the other side, typically. But what you could do, for instance, is you could move like down this star lane and have one point of movement left, and then take the teleporter all the way across. So they work almost exactly like wormholes, but they're everywhere. And the one other thing that's really neat about these portals is that if you are in a non-aggression pact with pirates, every system that has a pirate established on it has a portal, and you can teleport to their systems. And so this becomes a very cool logistical way to get the Argosy around the map for colonizing and sniping the best systems once you've explored enough of the galaxy. The other thing that it allows you to do is it provides you some cool shenanigans when playing against the AI and with other people in a war, where you can basically teleport a fleet behind their system. So like maybe they're blockading a choke point. Yeah, good luck, because I'm just going to teleport my entire massive fleet behind you onto this pirate node that you neglected to take out, and now my ship's going to attack some critical point of your system, of your empire. So the pirate thing is pretty cool. The other ability that we didn't talk about, the 4X Alchemist did not discuss much yet, and maybe they do later in their video. The ability of Corsairs. Privateer actions are pretty useful for 2 reasons that I've come up with. The primary way that you use Corsairs is, let's say that you have some cravers that you want to take out, but you really don't want to take on their systems because they have crappy planets that are depleted. You just want to squash some bugs. Using a Corsair fleet to do that, to engage their ships and to destroy their systems, it allows you to wage war even when you're at peace or at a truce with another empire, which is awesome, because you can, a lot of times you want to do something and they use their influence to stop you. Well, they can't stop pirates, and so you just convert your ships to Corsairs, you go back and you keep crushing them. But the cool thing is, once the Corsairs crush a system, the system does not get absorbed by your empire, and if you can wait there for a few turns, eventually it'll just crumble and then it'll be gone. So that's really, really useful. The other advantage of using Corsairs is in scouting. And this is a thing that I don't know whether they're going to fix or patch in the future, but the AI, because they've added this whole pirate diplomacy mechanic, especially on endless difficulty, the AI, I think, overvalues positive diplomacy with pirates. Because they have so much dust, because they basically cheat, the AI on endless difficulty will almost always make friends with the pirates. They will spend lots of dust and influence to keep them friendly, and they'll leave them all over the system. They'll never wipe them out. They'll rarely get aggressive with them. They'll more than likely befriend them, and they'll constantly pay for pirate marks on any of their enemies. But the problem is, the only enemy that's probably not going to be friendly with the pirates is you. And because of that, you're going to have every faction that you meet throw pirate marks on all your systems all the time. If you're friendly, they can't do that. And that's one of the weird things about this new diplomacy mechanic, is it's too one-sided in my opinion. It seems like nobody makes enemies with the pirates except for the player. which is unfortunate. But it does provide some advantages to you that you can take advantage of. And one of those is there will always be pirates throughout the system because of that, and you can use that to logistically move around your fleets. The other thing that it allows you to do is your scout ships. You can turn your scout ships into Corsairs, and nobody will ever attack them. You can go to every single system, you can sit on their worlds, you can scout all their curiosities, and they will never attack your pirate ship, in my experience. I've never had it happen. Like, my pirate ship never gets attacked because everybody's friendly with the pirates. And it's kind of ridiculous. Nobody fears the pirates. As long as you don't attack anybody, they're not going to care. You know, it's a way to kind of take advantage of the system currently that I hope kind of gets changed, to be perfectly honest. But it makes absolutely no sense not to turn your initial scout ships into pirate ships as you're going around scouting. What's curious is that even though you're listed as pirates, people still know you're vaulters. So like, if I go, say I take my scout ship over here as a pirate corsair and I scout these curiosities, I still get diplomatic points towards relation points towards accelerating my relations with these guys as if a vaulter had done it. And so there's some little details that I'm not quite sure that they have this pirate diplomacy thing figured out 100%. But yeah, it makes almost no sense not to turn your scout ships into pirates and then use them to scout the entire galaxy, because people will basically just leave you alone. I don't think I've ever had a situation where a pirate corsair of my possession has been attacked by an AI player. They just leave you alone because they overvalue positive diplomacy with pirates. So that's my take on that. And I think that's going to wrap up the video. It went a lot longer than I thought it would, but I wanted to just put this out there and give a shout out to 4X Alchemist, because I think they're doing great work. I had a great conversation with them in their comment sections of some of their videos, and I wanted to maybe continue that on my channel. So I hope you guys are having a great day. I'm going to try to get back to making videos again. I know it's been a couple weeks, but I've had to kind of take a break. I just haven't had the energy when I've been recording videos. But the other thing that I've been doing a lot of is I have been playing a little bit of Northgard again. I'm having some issues with it. It's been kind of buggy, and I don't know if it's a hardware issue on my side, because I did have some issues with some hardware failure recently, or if it's because the new patch is just new and buggy and they're going to fix it. But when I've tried to record some Northgard content for you guys, it's failed, unfortunately. But I'll continue to try to do that. And I've also been spending a lot of time doing research on combat for this game, for Endless Space 2. And I'm hoping to put together a little presentation and present that in a new Nose video in the future. But if you have any ideas on combat effectiveness, weapons, I have a pretty good grasp of, at least at the tier 1 beginning of the game, which weapons are best suited for what types of engagements and situations, and I'll be presenting that hopefully in the next week or two. So again, this has been the Nose. If you have any comments, questions, feel free to leave them, and we'll catch you next time. Have a great day.